Welcome to Southern Cooking Made Simple. This is a story from the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia about a trip to my grandma and grandpa's house. When I was young, my mom, Barbara June Holcomb, married Charles Edward Fitzwater, and she used to take me over to her family over in Clay County, Indore, West Virginia. And her parents were Wilford Henry Holcomb and Ada Marie Holcomb. She was originally a Legg. She was the daughter of Bernard Breckenridge Legg and Lilly Legg. And she was originally from the head of Klein Hollow in Indore, West Virginia. They lived at the last house up.
You kids, get out of the creek.
In a two-story house at the top of the mountain. And if you went any further up, you could just go up to the cemetery, and then there was an orchard out past the cemetery. All of my family is buried up there. When I was little, my mommy's sisters used to come and stay at our house a lot, especially on the weekends. My Aunt Ramona was a cheerleader, and she used to come to the house and spend the weekends, and she would get ready to go to her ball games and stuff at our house. My dad worked at the alloy plant a lot, and sometimes they would be on strike or something and we would have to go out of state, but otherwise he worked at the alloy plant quite a bit, and he done other things on the side to bring in a little bit of money. He rode the alloy bus. All the men that worked down there pretty much rode the bus, and I could ride that bus over to my grandma's house in the summertime when they were having Bible school, when I was just a little teeny tiny thing. They always went to the Sycamore Baptist Church, and in the summer they would have a homecoming up there, and my grandma would always make her fried chicken, and Mommy would make her potato salad, and my Aunt Pauline would bring her spaghetti and meatballs. It was fantastic. My grandfather, he was a tremendous forager. He would go out in the woods and bring in sardis or wild grapes, maybe mushrooms or morels, whatever you call them, greens or berries. Sometimes he would bring in walnuts, different kinds of things for Grandma to make snacks and stuff for us, and it was fantastic. Maybe he'd bring in some sassafras to make us some tea, or something now called root beer. Or he might be bringing in some yellow root to use for medicinal purposes for like a sore throat. He was an avid hunter, so he was always going into the woods, whatever season it was. In the summertime, he liked to fish a lot. He was a very good taxidermist, and he used to do gunsmithing on the side. And he would order kits of guns and put those together and then sell them. He was very talented. He would order musical instrument kits and put those kits together, and then he would sell those as a completed item also. Come every Thursday or Friday night, they would have a singing in the living room. They would pull out their guitars, and Pawpaw and Wilbur and Jimmy and the boys would all play their musical instruments, and then his friends would stop by, and somebody would see the cars sitting there, so they'd know they were playing music, so everybody would stop in and bring their musical instruments to play along. It was fantastic. And my grandma, she'd be in the kitchen making a treat for everybody, like homemade cocoa, or maybe she was making some glazed donuts for everyone, or cookies. She had used up some black walnuts that the boys had brought in from hunting. They were always foraging for her and bringing in special things for her to cook up for us. My goodness, she was a good cook. Her mother was Lilly Missouri Legg, and she was a Cherokee Indian. She had a large family. Grandma had 12 siblings in her family, and she had 8 children of her own. And having a very large family, you always heard the large family chatter, children laughing. It was a fantastic experience to go to Grandma's house. They lived right by the road, and there wasn't very much property there for them to work with, but every inch of that property was used for something beneficial for their snacks and treats and food to fill up their pantry for the wintertime. My grandma was always putting something away. Either when you pulled in, you could see her out hanging clothes on the line all the time. With all 8 kids, she was always doing laundry. And she would be out there in the summertime. Maybe they were making a big kettle of apple butter, and I could still just be in the backyard, and you hear the dogs barking across the creek, and you hear the pigs over there in the pig pen. They always had pigs. There was a footbridge going across there, and I can just remember standing in that backyard. I could still look up and see the curtains blowing out the window in the wind, hear the water rushing by in the creek, smell the cinnamon and the apples, and Grandma stirring over there, that big old long kettle, everything right there in the yard, and Papa going over and filling the wood up and keeping the fire going for her, and the boys all going out to get more wood. It was always something going on. And when one person was busy doing something, when they were doing something, it was a family thing. Everybody had to join in. The creek was right there in behind the house, and no matter what, every day, I planned to get in that creek every year when it was summertime. Climbing on the hillside, swimming in the creek, playing on the mountain, walking down to Fadanamas to play at the pond. I don't ever remember them going anywhere like to the beach or anything on a vacation, because they always went to the hunting camp in Sugar Grove, Virginia. Every year, everybody would pack up all their duds and their sheets and towels and washcloths and everything, and pack up all their hunting supplies and gear and clothing and boots and guns, and we would all pile in out at that camp. And I can still remember my papa going out, and he was a extremely good bear hunter, and he would go out and hunt bear out there. And I can still remember him coming in. We had an old potbelly stove out in the camp in the living room, and it was the same room that Mama and Papa slept in. There was a couch to the right of the potbelly stove, and then there was a chair to the left of the stove. And all the boys would come in, and they'd be getting warm where they'd been out there hunting all day, and Papa would be sitting there by the fire, and he always smoked a cherry pipe, and he had that curly pipe, and he would take that pipe out of his mouth, and he would start telling his story about bagging his bear. And everybody would just listen so diligently while Papa told that story. I can still hear it, just like I was out there today. In the middle of the night, you could hear him up, throwing some wood in the fire. Now, Grandma, she always got up earlier than everybody else out at the camp, and she would go in the kitchen and start breakfast. I can just hear her in there now, talking to Papa, getting everything ready. He was diabetic, and she would help him get his insulin shot that morning. We had an old-timey wood cook stove out there, and Grandma would go in there, and she would always bring pork from home, because they put a pig up every fall, or a couple of them, whatever they had room for in the freezer. And she would take a package of that pork with us out to the camp, and we would get up in the morning, and you could smell that ham frying on the stove, and Grandma in there talking to Papa, getting the men off on their hunting excursion that day. And she would get everybody something in their belly and get them off on their day trip. And then we would get everything ready for when they come in. We would have to put the meat up, and we would have to we would take all that meat and stuff that they had brought in. Let's say Papa killed a bear, and my grandma, she would render out the grease out of that bear in the oven first, and then she would pack that grease up in containers so they could use that. Everybody put that on their shoes and their boots to keep them waterproof. And Mama would then, after she saved up all the grease that she was going to save, then she could put onions on top of that bear meat. and the onions would pull that game taste out of that, and then it wouldn't be so greasy because she would take the grease off before we ever packed it up. She could cook up a deer roast like it tasted like beef, and the same thing with a bear roast. She just knew how to cook and to make anything taste delicious. She's a very good cook. Her mother, Lilly, Missouri, was a Cherokee Indian, and she taught all of her girls to cook on a wood-burning stove up there in that holler, and they were all very good cooks. Her sister Pauline married an Italian immigrant son who had migrated here from Italy, and that really made a big impression on my mother's cooking, because she would teach her how to make those things and come home and Mom would make them for us. It was fantastic growing up in these mountains. My grandparents were such good foragers that there was always something new at Grandma's house. Always something going on, something interesting to do. They might be stringing beans in order to put them on string to make leather breeches. It was just always something that was very interesting to do at Grandma's house. When you got there in the morning, Grandma, she had 8 kids, so she would be doing her laundry in the basement. They had a great big basement, and it had a big tall ceiling. And Grandma would be in the back over on the right doing her laundry on an old wringer type washer, and then we'd take those clothes out and hang them on a line, and then while those was drying, she'd be back in there putting another load through, trying to get something going, and then after we was finished with that, we'd probably go pick something out of the garden that was ready to be put up and put in a jar. All the tasks and everything was done by everybody. It wasn't just her doing the task. If she had green beans to can or whatever, all the family was right there helping her do each and every chore. It wasn't just for one person to do, it was for the whole family. Having a big family, there was always somebody pulling in or coming in, bringing something, helping Grandma in some way. Grandma was always a busy woman. She had a lot of things to do in a day's time. She had her laundry, she had the house to clean up, she had to cook 3 times a day for 8 kids. 10 people to cook for a day is a lot of people to cook for. They always had a great big furnace down in the basement. The thing looked like an igloo. It was a wood and coal burning furnace, and my grandma would go down there and what she called banking that at night. Well, sometimes she would forget to open the flue, and the black soot and stuff would just roll out the registers. I could still hear my papa in there fussing at her. Why didn't you open the flue, Marie? They raised all 8 kids in a 4-room house, and there was 2 beds in the back bedroom when I was there staying. That was after some of the kids had already moved away, and the boys had beds and the girls had beds. Now, out to camp, my papa had made bunk beds for everybody. They were full-size beds, and he had turned them into bunk beds, homemade bunk beds. And everybody would pile in out there at the camp. I can still hear the boys telling their tales. I can hear my grandma in the kitchen. Hey, y'all, come on in here and fix you a plate. I got fried deer meat, mashed potatoes and gravy, biscuits, and a strawberry rhubarb pie. I'm going to make some black walnut cookies after a while on them walnuts y'all brought me. Get me some more of them if you go back over there. Hunting again. Well, Grandma was always looking for something out in the wild. We would go pick poke greens or Shawnee or bear's paw out of the fields or beside the creek, wherever you knew they were. There's a lot of things to forage for in these mountains. Wild grapes, mushrooms, muggles. I don't know if you've ever had ramps or not. They're a really strong, like a garlic. Better than garlic, better than an onion, but a cross of all the above. Here in West Virginia, we have something called the Feast of the Ramson. And that's once a year. Everybody goes up on the mountain in the highest parts and digs ramps. And when they bring those ramps in, then everybody sits around and cleans them all up. And then we have ham, real thick soup, pinto beans, and cornbread. You take those ramps and you boil them in water just a little bit to get them a little bit tender. And then you take them out of that boiled water and you put them over in bacon grease and fry them. They're absolutely delicious. Some people eat them with a little bit of vinegar on them, which is my favorite way, or ketchup. I love ketchup on mine, but I like ketchup on everything. When I was growing up, my grandma, she used to let me help her cook. I'd go in the kitchen, I was a little tiny thing, and I'd say, "Mama, can I help you cook?" And she'd say, "Yeah, you can help me cook the salad. Won't you go down to the garden and get us some lettuce, some green onions, a tomato or two, and you can make the salad." So she taught me really, really young how to start making salads, and I have kept that a tradition in my family for my whole life. I've learned now, most people go out and they buy something called a coleslaw dressing. It's just mayonnaise and equal parts of vinegar and sugar, salt and pepper. Super simple. You don't have to buy all that stuff. You can even make your homemade mayonnaise, egg yolk, and oil. When I went to my grandma's house, she was always making something. She would either be cooking something on the stove, or she would be cooking something in the oven. Sometimes they would be out in the yard canning, because they always put up enough green beans, tomatoes, and pickles to last throughout the winter. If you didn't can them in the summer and put them up for the winter, you didn't have any that winter. They were poor. Work was hard to find here in the mountains, and what work that they did find, it took every dime that you could bring in to squeeze by. And Papa would try to work to make a little bit of money so they could have money to go out to the camp and, be able to bring in enough food to feed his family for a whole year. He was an avid hunter, and they didn't go to the grocery store and buy meat. They'd go out in the yard and get a chicken and wring his neck, and that was the Sunday dinner. And they would go out and fish in the summertime. If it wasn't bear or deer, it would be squirrel or whatever season that it was. And if it wasn't any type of season, then they had stuff stored up in the freezer and canned up to last them until it was hunting season again, so they could take care of all their needs from the land. And that's what it's about here in the Appalachian Mountains. It's about foraging and preserving, canning, putting up anything you can get your hands on, because you can bet before summertime gets here again, your belly's going to be needing filled up a whole lot of times. And it's some delicious goodness. She'd be in there cooking. She might be making potato salad or something in the middle of the winter. And she'd say, "Run down in the basement and get me some sweet pickles or some dill pickles," whatever she was making. She had everything she needed right there. They put up the tomatoes to do the beef stew, chili, spaghetti sauce, and stuff like that. And then they done the green beans, enough to last them a year. They done the cucumbers into pickles. They done strawberry jam, grape jelly from the grape arbor. They had rhubarb growing right there in the yard. Gooseberries, there was a gooseberry bush as soon as you stepped out of the car, right there. There was just so many things to do at Grandma's house. You get there in the morning, she'd be hanging those clothes up, and all day long we'd be going up and working in the kitchen and getting something ready to can, and then we'd be down there getting more clothes hung on a line, or take some off if they was dry yet. She had 4 or 5 lines there lined up for clothes. 8 kids is a lot of kids to have to do their laundry for, I'm just saying. But Grandma kept up with all of it, and her house was never messy. But she only had the things that she needed in her house. She didn't keep a lot of clutter. She didn't have a lot of things on the side. She just kept what she needed. It was so much fun to go to their house, because I really enjoyed those traditions. The apple butter, the chow chow in the fall, all the things that went along with that, and getting ready to do those things, stringing up the beans for leather breeches that she would cook around Christmas time. The boys would always go out and get a tire to put over the fire when we were sleigh riding in the wintertime. And we would come in and we would have all kinds of soot up in our nose holes where Dare Swain and Paul and Jimmy and them had used a tire when we was sleigh riding on an old car hood off the mountain. Dare Swain, he used to go up there and go swing on a grapevine. And he'd go up there and he had his Tarzan call, oh, and I'd hear him up there, so I run up there one Easter time and I was going to swing on that grapevine, and I got me a big run at it like he did. I just thought that looked like so much fun, and I was like, what, yes, I can do that. Oh my gosh, I got my outfit so dirty. I can still hear my mom hollering, Melanie, get in here before you get your Easter frock dirty. She called it an Easter frock. It was a white dress and white leotards and white shoes, but that's what happens when you live in the mountains. I'd follow them kids anywhere just to see what I could get into. We combed the creek banks. We combed the mountainside. We was over there playing where they kept the coal pile at across the creek. We was running up and down the road or going down to Thad and Emma's to ice skate on their pond. They had one pair of ice skates and 9 people had to share the same pair of ice skates. Oh, it was so much fun growing up in these mountains. These hills of West Virginia have been my home for 62 years. Y'all come back for another story on a different day.
Folks, don't wait. Get Kellogg's new Sugar Smacks. They're better than ever. Puffs of wheat, sugar toasted, and candy sweet. You bet. Just get Kellogg's Sugar Smacks, brand new. A Northwest Mountie, and he's been training.
This has been a Film Days presentation.